Hi guys, welcome to Colby's Coasters. Today is kind of a different video. I haven't done this video in a while, and I kind of wanted to do a top 14 roller coasters at Kings Island rankings video. I haven't done one in a while, and this is my third rankings video to do. So I've written 5 new rides at Kings Island, which I'll suggest in the rankings. Now let's dive into the rankings for number 14, which is the Great Pumpkin Coaster. This EMF Miler Kiddie Coasters is very smooth. I call it smooth because the drop is very smooth. Sometimes it shakes, but it's like a vibration. But it's still kind of smooth, though. Coming at number 13 is Flying Ace Aerial Chase. This Vekoma Hanging Bane is kind of a rough ride. This opened in 2001, which is kind of a long time ago. It's like 21 years ago, and this ride is still very rough. The restraints are very bulky, and those very tight, almost unbanked helixes are very rough. And sometimes I put my feet up because it's like you're gonna hit the supports underneath you. And it's like, huh? You're gonna hit the supports. Coming at number 12 is Woodstock Express. This PTC wind coaster dates back all the way to 1972 when Kings Island opened. This is one of Kings Island's opening day attractions, and this ride is running really well this year. It's really smooth. You get a bit of airtime, and I noticed after the first drop, and when you go into the turnaround, your legs shove forward, almost hitting the front of the car. When you go up the turnaround, you're shove, and you're oh my gosh, what just happened? And yeah, that's all I have to say about it. Coming at number 11 is Adventure Express. This Aerodynamics mine train is kind of rough because the roughness because the roughest part is that swooping dive turn under those weird things. I don't know what they're called, but they're weird 4 of them that you hit your head on. It feels it's a near-miss moment with them. And the first tunnel there's a set of trims, and it's they're off. But because in Kings Island's POV of Adventure Express, it's it slows down a bit and then it goes on that hard turn. But when we rode it, it was trimless. It felt trimless, but the trims were still on. So you slam on the turn, you're yank, and then you're go at the first lip till and you're snap up to it. And you're oh my gosh, it's loud. The tunnels are loud on the ride. There's 4 tunnels. And the last one, the second lip till, with those weird statue things that are mine statues. That's what I call them because they just look like mine people, mining. And it's the first turn, the turn before the first lip till. The turn before the second lip till is very sharp, really, a lot sharper. So there's a set of trims, same thing. It feels it's trimless, and you just slam on the turn, and you go up the second lip till, and you're oh my, is this gonna fall apart? Because the train, it felt the train tips out, outwards. But really, it's just the force that, it puts on the train. And it kind of puts stress on the track. And that's all I have to say about the Adventure Express. Coming at number 10 is Backlot Stunt Coaster. This Premier Rides launch coaster is actually a pretty good ride, but this is the reason why it's at number 10. it's a short ride, and the tunnels doesn't really have much theming, and I like more theme in the tunnels, like some police cars and like helicopters, because after the second launch with the helicopter and the fire, sometimes when the fire's off, it kind of makes the ride a bit like not like a good ride. I like when the fire's on. I've seen when the fire's off before. And in the sweep and turn into the tunnel, you're like, whoa! And you yank down the turn and you twist and you're like yank, and then you go down and you do a little hill that doesn't really get much airtime. And there's like a set of trims that you notice slows it down, then you go into the brake run. And that's all I have to say about Backlot Stunt Coaster. Coming at number 9 is Invertigo. It's Vekoma Boomerang is actually kind of rough. It's kind of rough. It's not really rough. The reason why it's kind of rough, because when you go backwards, we were facing like straight, like almost straight up, it felt like. Because we were in like the front and back. Because when we were in the station, we were facing the pathway. And you're like, oh my, we're going to go backwards. And you go up, then you're like, you get let go, and you're like, oh my gosh. And then you go in this whippy cobra roll. And you vertical loop, then you go backwards even whippier. The cobra roll is so whippy. And then you go in the station, and so there's like this yellow cover thing so nothing falls on the people, and then literally the wind was like whoosh onto you, and it's so crazy because the ride only goes 50 miles per hour, but it feels like it goes faster. And yeah, that's all I have to say about Invertigo. Coming at number 8 is Flight of Fear. This indoor Premier Rides launch coaster is kind of rough. The first launch feels kind of smooth. Then when you go into the cobra roll, you're like whip, and you get whipped again. Then that weird Immelman kind of loop. And then it's like so whippy, you're like yank. We rode it in like the third car close to the middle of the cars of the train. Close to the middle of the train, it was really rough. Because there's weird like turns, and they snap again, and they snap again, and they're like, and that corkscrew up before the brake run, it's so whippy, you're like yank, and you go up to the brake. And it seems like Flight Fear has shin guards, like by your feet, and it feels like your legs are gonna pound on them. Well, they're like, they hold the lap bar, like they hold where the lap bar, like pull, when you pull on the lap bar, it like moves it, and then that trim that stops you, you're like, oh my gosh, I think we're stuck, but then you get let go, and you're like, oh my gosh, and then you turn and you do those weird turnarounds, those weird like kind of, I can't explain, they're like highly banked turns. And yeah, that's all I have to say about Flight of Fear. Coming at number 7 is The Racer. This PTC wind coaster dates back all the way from 1972. And this ride opened with the park like Woodstock Express did. But this ride had 500 feet of retracking last year in 2021. And it made it a lot smoother than I expected it would be, because they did like the almost the whole first half like to the turnarounds, and then before the turnarounds you're like, oh my gosh, and it's like you're going straight up, but you're like going like only 45 degrees. And you still get a lot of airtime on this thing. The racers, you get a lot of airtime. Some people said for the retracking, you won't get much airtime, but you do. And they were wrong. You actually do get a lot of airtime. That's all I have to say about the racers. Coming at number 6 is the Bat. This aerodynamic suspended coaster is very smooth. We rode it in the front row, which is pretty good. It was butter smooth. But the thing about the Bat, it's a very short ride, but the first lift hill makes it so slow. Because it's so slow and it's so loud. And you're like, oh my gosh, this is annoying. I'm getting off this thing. I'm like, come on, the ride's gotta be over. Why is this lift hill so slow? And then when you're at the top, you're like, oh, you can see Great Lodge. And you're like, oh my, we're going. And when you look down, you just see grass. It's kind of weird when you look down. It doesn't look that tall, but it really is. It's only like 75 feet, but it's not that bad. And that's all I have to say about the Bat. Coming at number 5 is Banshee. This B&M invert coaster is kind of rough. I call it rough because the second time I rode it, on the teal train, which is like one of the rough trains, it was so unbearably rough. And we sat in the 6th row, which is toward the back, and we got whipped down the drop at like 60 miles per hour, and they're like, oh my gosh, that's fast. And then you go in this dive loop. The dive loop doesn't really get much, well, it gets a bit like hang time, but then like at the end, that slow, very slow, like heartline roll, then you like do this helix, then you go into the brake run. The first time I rode it, it was so smooth. On the blue train in the 2nd row, it was so smooth. But the teal train in the 6th row, it was not that smooth. And that's all I have to say about Banshee. Coming at number 4 is Mystic Timbers. This GCI 1 coaster is actually kind of smooth. We rode in the back row when we visited park, and it was actually not that bad. I mean, it was still kind of shaky. It felt a bit rougher than it really was, but it's still a really great ride. You get a lot of airtime, and those twists in the back, it's so intense. And you're like, oh my gosh, here we go, twist again. And you're like, twist, twist. And the shed is like, what is going on in there? Because when the ride opened in 2017, it said, hashtag what's in the shed. There's a snake, a bat, and a tree. And there could be nothing there. And that's all I have to say for Mystic Timbers. Number 3, the Beast, the top 3. Number 3 is the Beast. This in-house built wind coaster made by Kings Island in 1979 had a revamp this year, and I rode it and I was like, oh my goodness. I rode in the 4th row, which is a non-axle seat, and it was so smooth. On the first drop, it's so smooth, and it's still trimmed, but the trim doesn't really hit that hard. And that turn after the first drop, it's like much more banking to it. But really, the slope of it seems like less. It's like more of like almost flat. And after the turn and the straightaway, the trim doesn't really slow you down. It's like flying through there. And then they placed this like piece of like new track, like long piece of new track going into the 2nd tunnel. It felt like it did. People say it got a bit of airtime. I didn't really feel airtime. I felt like laterals because you slam to the side, and they placed like an airtime hill to try to give you guys some airtime. And you're like yank, and then you go in the tunnel, and then you're like flying through. And then when you go into the second lift hill, that platform, we almost passed it. And we were like, oh my gosh, we almost passed that thing. Like, because we were right next to it when we got to it. And then the double helix, the entrance to it, it feels really weird. And the trim on the second drop, I kind of felt it. It still kind of hits a bit. You could still kind of feel it. But the double helix, the entrance into it, it's like, oh my gosh. It feels more laterals than it really was last year. And then the second, when you enter, the entrance of, above the entrance of the double helix, it's like the same thing. The tunnel of the double helix looks different from the old tunnel to the new tunnel. And then you just do the straight section, which is very normal. And yeah, that's all I have to say about the Beast. Coming at number 2 is Diamondback. This B&M Hypercoaster is a very good ride. You get so much airtime on this thing. And we sat in the third row, which is like the 2 seats that are together. We were close to sitting in the front. And in the first drop, you feel so much airtime that, you're, oh my gosh, ah. And then the trimmed airtime hill, I felt the trim hit, but you still, get so much airtime. In the mid-course, I felt it slow down, but still, you get so much airtime on those 2 hills. And the splashdown, I felt like a little sprinkle of water, and that's it. And I was like, okay, that's very weird. Because I felt a sprinkle, and I'm like, oh my. I felt a sprinkle of water a bit. And yeah, that's all I have to say about Diamondback. Coming at number 1, the best ride at Kings Island. And my favorite ride, in my opinion, is Orion. This B&M Giga Coaster, which is the newest ride at Kings Island, is very, very smooth. But the second time I rode it, I felt like a very, very strong rattle. And I was like, why does this have a rattle? It's very new. And it's probably because the wheels are very jagged and old. Because they seem very jagged. And it felt like it was running on jagged rails because it was it felt really weird. But that drop in the second row, when the second time we rode it, we were in the second row, and the first time we rode it, it was in the second row, and it was so smooth. The first time it was the smoothest I thought it would be. And that wave turn, you're because you go sideways, and then that trimmed airtime hill, and the speed hill before that, big airtime hill, you get so much airtime. And that intense helix into the weird turn into the brake run, that pop into the brake run, you get so much floater airtime, and it feels so good. And yeah, that's my 14 roller coasters at Kings Island ranking videos. I hope you guys like and subscribe to Colby's Coasters.